My name is Emma Clark. I'm 34 years old, and on Monday morning at exactly 8:12, I sat by the window of a quiet cafe, sipping black coffee, watching the building across the street begin to choke on its own arrogance. That building, sleek glass, towering with logos and pride, was home to Garrison Systems, the tech company I had devoted 6 years of my life to. Until last Friday, when I said no to unpaid overtime for the third time in 1 month. Let me take you back to where it started. When I joined Garrison Systems, they were a small but ambitious cybersecurity firm with one mission: protect the world's data. I was the second engineer hired onto their infrastructure team. Back then, we were scrappy, collaborative, and actually human. We celebrated launches with pizza and late-night laughs, and we supported each other during crunches. I built the first version of their adaptive firewall, nicknamed Pulse, from scratch in my tiny apartment using 2 monitors, a cat named Murphy, and a lot of caffeine. I never missed a deployment window. I was the go-to person when something broke at 3 a.m. My documentation became the gold standard. My code was stable. But most of all, I cared. I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was building something real, something that mattered. But like many good things, it didn't last. 2 years ago, we were acquired by a larger firm. On paper, the deal was a strategic alignment. In reality, it was a slow, suffocating unraveling of everything we'd built. HR started using phrases like performance elasticity and revenue efficiency. Our new CEO, Todd Harris, didn't come from tech. He came from finance. Tech is just numbers with extra steps, he once said in a quarterly meeting. That should have been a red flag. It got worse when they hired Dana Wells as our new department head. Dana was polished, MBA, early 40s, spoke in buzzwords and timelines, knew how to look impressive in a meeting, but didn't know the first thing about system load balancing, let alone Pulse. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd learn. Maybe she'd trust us to do the technical heavy lifting. But I was wrong. Need you to run a full system audit by Monday, she said casually one Friday afternoon, tapping on her tablet like she was ordering coffee. That's a 20-hour job minimum, I replied, trying to stay polite. I can schedule it for next week and loop in DevSec. Weekend work builds character, Emma. We need more people willing to go the extra mile. Not everyone is cut out for leadership. I said no. It wasn't a dramatic no. It wasn't angry. Just calm. Clear. I'm not available to work unpaid weekends. My contract outlines a standard work week. If you'd like to scope the audit for Monday, I'll need overtime approval. Her eyes flickered. I could see the gears turning, calculating cost, risk, leverage. She said nothing at first, just tapped harder on her tablet. That night, I received 3 emails from Dana, one assigning me the audit anyway, one reiterating team expectations, and one marked high importance. Failure to demonstrate flexibility may impact performance reviews, I responded, respectfully declining again, and copied HR. I attached a copy of my contract. The silence after that was deafening. On Monday, nothing happened. On Tuesday, she removed me from a client project I'd led for 2 years. On Wednesday, I was excluded from the infrastructure roadmap planning session. And on Thursday, the HR calendar invite came. 1:30 p.m. Emma Clark, performance discussion. I knew what was coming. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. Dana read from a script. We've decided to part ways. Effective immediately. No warnings, no official write-ups, no review. You're being let go for a lack of team spirit and resistance to leadership directives, she said. We don't accept laziness here. She used that word. Laziness. After 6 years of saving their infrastructure from collapse more times than I could count. Frank, the front desk security guard, walked me out. He looked more upset than I was. I'm sorry, he whispered. It's not right. It's fine, Frank, I said, smiling. I already made peace with it. What Dana didn't realize was that Pulse, the very heartbeat of their network, Needed manual authentication every 72 hours from a primary architect to maintain live sync with the external client shells. That wasn't a bug. That was by design, for security. And Pulse didn't accept replacements without a coded token that only I had access to. No sabotage, no hacks, just protocol. And it was Friday, which made Monday morning 72 hours later. At 8:12 a.m., I sat at Cafe Marlowe across the street, coffee in hand, watching the lights flicker. Pulse had stopped. The heartbeat was gone. And Garrison Systems had no idea how much trouble they were in. The moment the lights flickered inside Garrison Systems' glass tower, I knew Pulse had started the first phase of its lockdown protocol. From my window seat at Cafe Marlowe, I stirred my coffee slowly, deliberately. I wasn't in a rush. The system I had designed didn't move all at once. It was methodical. Like me. Phase 1. Isolate the external shell from third-party connections to prevent data breaches. Phase 2. Freeze access to system logs and code repositories. Phase 3. Shut down client-facing operations, one node at a time. It was designed as a security measure to protect client data from accidental corruption or malicious insiders. The system didn't crash. It protected itself. And unless the original architect authenticated the renewal token within the 72-hour window, everything locked, which, as of 8 a.m. today, had officially expired. Across the street, I saw the first signs of panic. Someone in a suit sprinted past the front desk toward the elevators. 2 others appeared in the lobby, phones pressed to their ears, faces pale. At 8:15 a.m., the Garrison Systems website went down. Client dashboards followed within minutes. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. But I won't lie. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching a company that had labeled me lazy scramble over its own negligence. I hadn't done anything wrong. That was important to me. Before I left on Friday, I had submitted all required documentation to IT compliance, just like I'd always done. I logged Pulse's 72-hour renewal requirements. I included detailed instructions on how to properly rotate the security token, something I'd offered to teach multiple times. Each offer had been ignored. "We're too busy," they said. "Just document it." The truth? The system wasn't complicated. It was just thorough. And the people in charge thought thorough meant slow. Or worse, replaceable. I checked my phone. 1 new voicemail. Unknown number? Then another. Then 4 more in the span of 3 minutes. I recognized the area code. It was Garrison's internal line. I hit record and let it ring. By 8:21, the cafe door swung open. A woman in a suit paused just inside the entrance, scanned the room, and spotted me instantly. "Emma Clark?" she asked, approaching cautiously. I nodded. "I'm Lauren Cho, Director of Risk and Compliance." Her tone was clipped, formal. "We're experiencing an urgent systems malfunction. Are you aware of it?" I took a sip of my coffee. "I designed Pulse," I said. "So, yes, I'm aware." She took a seat without being invited, breath sharp. "We need you to come in immediately." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm no longer employed by Garrison. That was made very clear." "I understand that, but we're in a crisis. We're prepared to discuss terms." There it was. I slid a printed envelope across the table, something I had brought just in case. Inside was a short 1-page agreement. Consulting engagement. $450 per hour. 4-hour minimum. No admission of wrongdoing. Remote work only. Lauren blinked. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said, calm. "It's industry standard, especially in emergency mitigation situations." She didn't argue. She stood up. "I'll have legal review it. Expect a call within the hour." At 8:42, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. A single line. "Meridian Global reporting full outage." Status? Meridian was Garrison's largest client. Millions of dollars in enterprise contracts. I knew their dashboard like the back of my hand. At 8:53, Garrison's stock ticker dipped by 4%. The silence in the cafe was oddly comforting. A couple read newspapers in the corner. A barista quietly wiped down counters. Life moved on, even as a corporate empire unraveled across the street. I remembered Dana's voice from Friday. "We don't accept laziness here." What she didn't realize was that I had worked every unpaid weekend for almost a year before I finally started saying no. I'd said yes when my mother had surgery and I couldn't be there. I said yes when my ex moved out and left me with a mess of a lease and a bruised heart. I said yes when my cat Murphy was dying and I should have been home, not debugging servers at 11 p.m. But saying yes had only earned me more expectations. Not respect, not protection, just more demands. The first time I said no, I was called difficult. The second time, uncooperative. By the third, I was fired. I finished my coffee and ordered another, black, no sugar. At 9:07, I received a call from legal. They'd agreed to the contract. By 9:12, I was logged into Pulse from my laptop, connected through a secured VPN. The system recognized me immediately. Primary architect recognized. Proceed with recovery? Yes. I tapped a few keys and the system began reversing the lockdown, step by step in the exact order I had designed it. No shortcuts, no magic tricks, just understanding. By 9:28, dashboards flickered back online. Internal logs synced. Client portals stopped returning error messages. Meridian servers reconnected. Lauren sent a text. "Are we stable?" "For now," I replied. "If you'd like it to stay that way, we should talk about system training and knowledge transfer. Properly this time." There was no reply. But across the street, I saw Dana, standing in the lobby, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes wide with confusion and maybe fear. The heartbeat was back. But I had just begun to reclaim mine. By 9:45 a.m., Garrison Systems was back online. Barely. Client services had stopped spiraling. Support tickets were slowing. And Meridian Global, their most high-profile client, had just sent a 2-word email. "Thank you." I sat there, still in Cafe Marlowe, fingers hovering above my keyboard. My second coffee sat half-finished. Across the street, through the reflective glass of Garrison's 10th floor executive floor, I saw the shadows of suits pacing back and forth. They had their system back. But the control? That was a different story. I logged off my secure session and disconnected the VPN. 4 hours, $1,800 earned, and I had every right to invoice it. Legally, ethically, professionally. But I didn't move from my seat. Because this wasn't over. My inbox pinged. Subject line. Urgent, Pulse System Access Protocol. From Dana Wells. The same Dana who had looked me in the eye 3 days earlier and told me I wasn't committed. Who dismissed my concerns as whining. Who said I lacked team mentality. And now, here she was. Not apologizing, not explaining. Just requesting access to the one thing she had already tried to erase me from. I opened the email. "Emma, we urgently need the complete documentation and access credentials for Pulse in order to avoid future issues. As you're no longer part of the team, please hand off all remaining proprietary knowledge so we can continue operations uninterrupted. Regards, Dana Wells, Director of Engineering." No greeting. No thank you. No acknowledgement that, without me, their entire infrastructure would still be offline. I didn't reply. Instead, I called my attorney, Carla Bennett, a longtime friend and a sharp litigator who never sugarcoated anything. "You did everything by the book," she said after I laid it all out. "If they want ongoing access to your designs or expertise, they pay for it. Period. You were terminated without cause. They lost the right to demand anything." "What about the documentation I already submitted to IT before I left?" "You gave them what was required. If they didn't read it, that's their problem. You're not their babysitter." Carla paused. "But be careful, Emma. The higher the stakes, the more likely they'll try to spin the narrative. They may already be preparing for damage control." She was right. By noon, LinkedIn buzzed with rumors. Temporary system outage at Garrison. Routine maintenance delay. Client dashboards unavailable for scheduled updates. Scheduled updates? That was their story? They were trying to whitewash the whole incident, erase what had actually happened, and pretend nothing went wrong. Except, people were talking. A junior developer messaged me anonymously. Emma, they're saying it was a glitch, that it had nothing to do with Pulse. Everyone knows it's not true. Just wanted you to know people are on your side. That hit me harder than I expected, because I had spent so long thinking I was alone in this, that nobody saw how much I gave, how often I covered for others, how often I said yes, even when it hurt. But they had noticed. Quietly. Silently. The way people do in workplaces where speaking up has consequences. My phone buzzed again. This time a message from someone I hadn't expected. Amit Patel, lead back-end developer. We'd worked side by side for years before he transferred teams. Hey, they pulled me into a meeting this morning asking if I could help simplify Pulse. Said it's too complex and they want to refactor. Just thought you should know. Also, Dana tried to blame the outage on a corrupted deployment. I told them she was wrong. I blinked at the screen. They weren't just spinning, they were rewriting history. I typed back. Thanks for standing up. Be careful. He replied instantly. Already backed up all my emails. Learned that from you. I exhaled. Slowly. Carefully. The air felt different now. Sharper. Braver. Because here's the thing about being called lazy. Difficult. Replaceable. If you hear it long enough, part of you starts to wonder if it's true. And yet, on the day their world nearly fell apart, who did they call? Not Dana. Not the new DevOps manager she brought in. Not any of the yes people who stayed late to earn points at team-building workshops. They called me. And they would again. Because Pulse wasn't just code. It was years of architecture, security layers, and situational logic only understood through time, trial, and error. You couldn't fake that. You couldn't copy and paste experience. So I did what they refused to do. I documented the truth. I started writing. Not code, not configurations, a log, a record. Every email, every incident, every instance of ignored warnings, every time Dana dismissed protocol, every time I offered to train someone and was told, not now. Because if they were going to frame me as the problem, they were going to have to answer for the receipts. At 12:43 p.m., a new email arrived. Subject line, request for consultation, Pulse Infrastructure Transition Plan. From Lauren Cho, not Dana. I smiled. Finally, someone upstairs realized the difference between liability and value. By 1:10 p.m., I was on a video call with Lauren Cho, the same compliance director who had shown up at Cafe Marlowe that morning, now seated in what appeared to be a private office, blinds drawn, door closed. I want to be clear, she began, her voice calm but focused. This is not a request for free information. We'd like to contract you, again, on a short-term consulting basis, specifically to design a transition plan for Pulse so future administrators can manage it without dependency on any single engineer. There it was. Dependency. That word hung in the air. I understood what she meant. The company had just been brought to its knees by a single point of failure. Me. And in tech, that's the nightmare scenario. No matter how talented you are, if a system is architected around one person, executives will eventually call it a risk. I'm open to that, I replied, measured. But let's set some boundaries this time. Lauren nodded. Understood. We agreed on a 2-week engagement, part-time, remote only, my standard consulting rate same as before. I would provide documentation, walkthrough videos, and most importantly, knowledge transfer sessions. If, and only if, the company identified actual personnel with the qualifications to manage Pulse. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I knew the system could be transferred. But not to someone like Dana, who couldn't tell the difference between a load balancer and a firewall exception. I signed the agreement by 3 p.m. That same evening, Lauren sent me internal notes and system logs from the outage window. I reviewed them alone in my apartment, Murphy curled beside me on the couch, half asleep. The reports confirmed what I already suspected. Dana had authorized emergency admin access to Pulse Sunday night without a renewal token, triggering the system's autonomous lockdown. It wasn't sabotage. It was ignorance, and a refusal to ask for help. The log showed at least 5 failed access attempts, escalating to a security warning by 2:14 a.m., then triggering full isolation by 3:03 a.m. I remembered how many times I'd offered to run training sessions, the times I'd sent those emails, the ignored calendar invites, the way Dana had waved me off in meetings. "We don't have time for that, Emma. Just put it in Confluence." She hadn't just dismissed me. She dismissed the very concept of preparation. By midweek, I began my documentation sessions. Lauren arranged for 3 engineers to attend virtually: Amit, backend; Teresa, networking; and Gabe, new hire from another cybersecurity firm. All capable, all professional. None of them tried to pretend they knew everything. They asked questions, took notes. Gabe even stayed on the call after our first session to say, "This is some of the cleanest architecture I've seen. It's tight." That meant more to me than I expected. For the first time in over a year, I felt respected. Not tolerated, not leveraged, just respected. On Thursday afternoon, as I was recording a walkthrough of the authentication module, I received a Slack message from an anonymous source. Just one sentence. "Dana's on leave. HR announced it this morning." I blinked at the screen. No details, no explanation. But it wasn't hard to guess. Lauren confirmed it later, off the record. Let's just say, decisions were made without proper risk evaluation. The board's not happy. Too much exposure, too many close calls. I asked if she'd been fired. "Number not yet," Lauren said carefully. "But she's not part of this transition project." A pause. Frankly, she shouldn't have been in the role to begin with. It was the first time I heard anyone inside Garrison admit that out loud, and it felt validating, not triumphant, just real. Because the truth is, I hadn't wanted Dana to fail. I hadn't wanted anyone to fail. I just wanted to do good work, in a place where good work was valued. But somewhere along the way, productivity had replaced humanity. Loyalty was measured by how much of yourself you were willing to give up. Your time, your evenings, your health, your identity. The more you gave, the less they valued it. That was the lie. And I had finally stopped believing it. At the end of my first week back as a consultant, Amit stayed on our final call a few minutes longer. "You know," he said, "after you left, people were scared to speak up, even those who knew what was happening. They thought they'd be next." I nodded. "I get it. I was scared too. But you still stood your ground." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thank you." He smiled. "You should have seen Dana's face when Lauren pulled out your February security memo. I swear she turned 3 shades of white." We both laughed. That night, I walked to the bookstore and bought a blank journal. I hadn't written in years, anything personal anyway. But something had shifted in me. I had lived through something ugly, and I had come out stronger, not just professionally, but personally, clearer, lighter. I had spent so long wrapped up in deadlines and data that I forgot how to pause, how to breathe. And now I had time. Time to reflect, time to draw boundaries, time to decide what I wanted next. The system at Garrison was back online, but mine had just begun to rebuild. It was Monday again, exactly 1 week after the shutdown. 1 week since Pulse had gone silent and dragged Garrison systems into a storm of its own making. But this Monday was different. There was no flickering screen across the street, no frenzied executives scrambling to recover. No desperate calls to my phone. Instead, there was silence. Not the kind born from chaos, but the kind that follows consequence. I had just wrapped up the last of my training sessions. Over 10 days, I walked 3 engineers, Amit, Teresa, and Gabe, through the layers of the system, step by step. They weren't trying to rush. They weren't trying to cut corners. They just listened, took notes, learned. And that, more than anything, gave me hope. Not for Garrison necessarily, but for the people still trying to make it work inside a system that had nearly failed them too. That morning, I logged on to finalize my last deliverable, a comprehensive pulse transition guide, complete with flowcharts, fallback procedures, and a simplified code index for common tasks. I triple-checked every detail. This wasn't about holding anything back. That part of me was gone. If they wanted to move forward, really move forward, they had to do it with transparency and respect. The same things I had once given them for free. Lauren messaged me around 10:30 a.m. "Emma, thank you. Everything you provided is clean and complete. The team has nothing but praise. I'll process your final invoice today." And then, "Would you be open to a longer-term advisory role?" I stared at the message, not because I was surprised by the offer, but because I had already asked myself that question, more than once. Would I go back? Would I work with the same company that called me lazy? That threw me out without warning after years of sacrifice? Would I walk back into the same building, now stripped of Dana and half the executive team, and try to build something new? I typed, and then deleted my first reply, and my second. Then finally, "Thank you, Lauren. I'm grateful to have helped stabilize things, but at this time, I need to step away for a while, reconnect with myself and figure out what's next. I wish the team the very best." Her reply came quickly. "Understood completely. Door is always open." Simple, respectful, no pressure. It was the kind of tone that had been missing for years. Later that afternoon, I took Murphy out on the balcony. He watched birds from the railing, content in the sun. I watched the city, slower now, softer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Amit. "FYI, Dana officially resigned. Not just leave anymore." "You okay?" I replied. "Honestly, yeah. People are breathing again." I smiled. I didn't feel vengeful. Just at peace. I knew how corporations worked. Dana's departure probably came with a cushy severance and a sanitized internal announcement. Pursuing new opportunities. That kind of thing. But in the quiet spaces between announcements and PR spin, people remembered. Not just how she left, but how she led. Or failed to. The legacy of poor leadership doesn't vanish with a resignation letter. And sometimes the most powerful accountability isn't loud. It's silence. Absence. Being replaced by something better. That night, I went to dinner with 2 old friends I hadn't seen in months. We talked about everything except work. At one point, one of them said, "You look different. Like, taller." I laughed. Probably just better shoes. But it wasn't. It was weight lifted. I'd been carrying the burden of being the reliable one for too long. The one who covered shifts, who cleaned up messes, who said yes out of guilt, out of fear, out of habit. Now I had space to ask what I wanted. Not just what was expected of me. Before bed, I checked my email one last time. There was a new message from someone I didn't recognize. Subject: "Saw your name mentioned. Are you open to new opportunities?" It was a hiring manager from a mid-sized cybersecurity startup. Apparently, they'd been impressed by how I handled the Garrison situation. Someone on their board had ties to Meridian and heard the whole story, minus the corporate PR filter. I didn't reply right away. Not because I wasn't interested, but because, for the first time in years, I wasn't desperate to prove myself. I already had. And that changed everything. 2 weeks after my final day as a Garrison Systems consultant, I stood in front of a blank canvas. Literally. It had been years since I painted. I used to lose myself in color and texture. Before Murphy, before Garrison, before work crept into my weekends and then into my evenings and then into my identity. I dipped the brush slowly into a jar of deep blue acrylic, hesitant at first. Then, a long stroke across the center. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Behind me, a gentle purring reminded me I wasn't alone. Murphy sat by the window, watching the leaves shift in the summer breeze. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't racing to meet someone else's deadline. No urgent pings, no late-night server patches, just a stretch of quiet. The recruiter I'd heard from earlier, Janelle, followed up twice. She was polite, never pushy. The startup she represented had a reputation for balance, clear boundaries, and actual human culture. Still, I didn't respond right away. I needed to know that whatever I chose next, it wasn't coming from fear, or ego, or obligation. It had to be from choice. That was the difference now. I wasn't trying to be indispensable. I wasn't trying to prove my worth. I was just living it. That Monday, I received an email that caught me off guard. It was from Teresa, one of the engineers I'd trained at Garrison. Subject: update, and something you should know. Hey, Emma, I wanted to thank you again for everything. Your documentation was gold. Seriously, I don't know how you managed to organize it so clearly, but it saved us more times than I can count already. Also, you should know, Lauren introduced a new internal policy last week. They're calling it the Pulse Protocol. It basically prevents any system from being owned, managed, or designed by just one person without documented backups and shared ownership. It's based almost entirely on your recommendations. She even gave you credit. Publicly, you changed more than you think. Teresa, I read the message twice. The Pulse Protocol. They could have buried it, changed the name, pretended it was theirs all along. But instead, they used my work to build a safeguard. Not just for infrastructure, but for people like me. People who give too much and are told it's never enough. I never got that kind of credit when I was working there full-time. But now, it didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like something bigger than that. It felt like legacy. A few days later, I met Janelle, the recruiter, for coffee. Not an interview, just a conversation. She turned out to be smart, funny, and refreshingly blunt. We've got too many burned-out engineers who think martyrdom is normal, she said, stirring oat milk into her drink. We're trying to build something different. I told her about what happened at Garrison, most of it anyway. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. I hear stories like yours all the time, she said, but rarely with that kind of ending. What kind of ending? I asked. The kind where someone doesn't let it break them. I left the cafe without giving her an answer, but I smiled the whole walk home. The following week, I said yes to a part-time advisory role with her firm. Not a full-time job, not a 70-hour grind. Just thoughtful, project-based consulting that respected my time and expertise. I set my own hours, I worked remotely, and they actually paid for training sessions. By the third month, I had started my own LLC, a consultancy focused on ethical systems architecture, documentation standards, and sustainable tech culture. I named it Third Hour Technologies, a private nod to the 72-hour pulse window that changed everything. Clients began coming in slowly at first, then more steadily. Not because I marketed myself aggressively, but because I built quietly, carefully and truthfully. Word spread, especially among mid-sized companies who didn't want to end up like Garrison. Every time I got on a call with a new team, I started with the same line. Let's build it the right way, so it doesn't fall apart when one person finally says no. Because if there was one thing I learned through all of it, it was this. The first time you say no, you'll be called difficult. The second time, you'll be called replaceable. But the third time, if you do it right, you'll be called necessary. And that's the kind of change that lasts. As for Garrison Systems, I hear they're doing fine. Lauren was promoted to COO. Amit now leads the infrastructure team. Teresa's mentoring junior engineers. And Dana? Last I heard, she'd taken a consulting role at a finance firm in Chicago. Let them have their tidy ending. I got the better one. The real one. And every morning when I sip my coffee beside Murphy, surrounded by unfinished paintings and open windows, I'm reminded of the moment it all shifted. Monday morning, 8:12 a.m., when Pulse went quiet, and I finally heard myself again.